Thank you so much, Ani, and thank you everybody for coming. Good evening, welcome. I'm Courtney Kowalchuk. I have been here the last couple of classes with you guys, and I'll be here through May doing these virtual, we call them Virtual Parent Academy. Tonight we're talking about positive discipline, and generally, I've talked about this before. This is one of the major approaches that I utilize when I'm working with parents. So, this is going to give you a little bit more information on what positive discipline is, what the foundation is, and where this gives you an insight to kind of where I gather a lot of my parenting approaches. So, we're going to kind of jump in. Thanks for coming and making the time, taking the time to be with us. Yeah, I think just like little quick housekeeping things. You can utilize the chat if you don't feel comfortable using your microphone to ask questions or to engage. I do love when you guys talk to me and talk to each other. It's really helpful if it's related to the topic that we're talking about. And we're going to throw lots of helpful stuff into the chat. There's a copy of the presentation in the PDF format so that you can follow along. You can save it to your computer or to your device and look at it later or share with your co-parent or your spouse or other people that are helping you raise your kids. Um, and so, yeah, you can utilize the chat if you need to. I always recommend everybody keep their mic muted just for the sake of privacy and helping us get through the presentation. We have about 2 hours, and typically I like to answer questions along the way. And then at the end, if I've got time, I'll give about 15 minutes for more time for questions. So let's jump in. I have a slide up. I typically like to give you guys a little bit of background. If you don't know me, I've been doing parenting work with San Marcos District for about, I think it's about 10 years now, maybe closer to 12. So some of you might have seen me before. We've done these courses multiple times. I've worked with Rady Children San Diego in the outpatient psychiatry clinics and the behavioral crisis center when that was around. So some of you may know me and some of you might not, but a little bit about me is that I'm a board certified clinical therapist. I've been working in this field for about 15 years. I specialize in children and adolescents with a particular emphasis on trauma and parenting, which is why I'm here with you guys tonight. So this gives you a little bit of background of like why you could listen to me and why I'm a credible source. I am a certified positive discipline parent and teacher educator, which is a lot of the material that I use in all of my presentations, but I'm giving you guys a little taste of positive discipline specifically tonight, and then in 2 weeks we'll do a part two. All right, give you a little bit of my experience. I've worked in inpatient and outpatient clinics, residential. I have my own private practice now. I served in the U.S. Air Force, worked for school districts and Rady Children's Hospital. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'm going to move on from that though, because you guys don't need to know too much more about me unless you have questions. So the way that I like to get started with most of the presentations, just to kind of get our minds going and kind of get us centered into what we're talking about tonight, I like to start with a quote. And Jane Nelson, who the quote is from tonight, she is basically the founder of positive discipline. And so I really wanted to share a quote that would get us started talking about things, maybe with the perspective that she takes. And this always was a quote that stuck out to me. It was one of the quotes that I learned when I was first learning about different types of parenting approaches and how to help families when I was a young therapist working with families at Rady. And so the quote that we start with is, where did we ever get the crazy idea that in order for kids to do better, we first needed to make them feel worse? Children do better when they feel better. And so that is kind of a paradigm shift for a lot of people. I know that in terms of discipline, it was kind of a paradigm shift for me, probably because of my own upbringing and how I was parented. Because of course, when I was looking into this stuff, I didn't have kids yet. So, um, Yeah, if you guys have any thoughts on that, can anybody relate to that quote? Does that speak to anybody? Does that mean something to anyone? Please share. You can either turn your mic on and share with us verbally, or you can throw it in the chat, whatever you think or whatever you feel the most comfortable with. I'll reread the quote one more time just to give it to you guys again. Where did we ever get the crazy idea that in order to get kids to do better, we first need to make them feel worse? Children do better when they feel better. So, any thoughts, any ideas, any revelations or things that you can relate to with that?
Honestly, I feel like it's because they make us feel bad and then we're like hitting back.
Totally. That makes sense. Yeah, it's like triggering for us a lot of the times. At least that's what I think when we parent.
Well, yeah, like when you ask them to do something 6 times and they don't listen to you, and you're just like, okay, you don't like me, so now I don't like you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's personal. It becomes this like personal, like you're disrespecting me or you don't care, you don't
Yeah.
like me. Yeah, those kinds of things. Absolutely. And that's kind of the foundation of a lot of relationships, right? Thank you so much for sharing and being brave and vulnerable with us. I think that right, that respect thing is a foundation to relationships, and I think with a lot of us, it feels off with our kids, especially when kids don't listen. Totally. Anybody else? So it feels personal. Yeah, and I think, did you want to
I-
say something else, Stephanie?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
maybe it's also like we remember how our parents spoke to us as well. So like I know you were starting to say something about when you were young and how you had experiences and how it's different now that you have kids. I think
Yeah,
like our parents were like more hands-on in terms of like you got spankings or you know or groundings or uh it was just a little bit more aggressive than we're trying to be now.
totally. Oh my gosh, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I do think that there's like shifts in generations, right? You probably, I mean, you're definitely noticing that, and I think anecdotally we certainly see that. I was going to get into this a little bit in when we I have some slides about different styles of parenting and kind of the introduction of positive discipline. It came in on the coattails of the generation in like the 1900s where it was like kids were seen and not heard, right? And so that was that kind of mentality. And then it slowly has morphed. I think my own parents' generation, it was very like, you do it because I say so, right? And so there's that like authoritarian, what you were describing is like lots of corporal punishment. Probably all of us, if not most of us, were spanked, or and that's kind of what we refer to when we're referring to when we talk about corporal punishment. It's like spankings, stuff like that. And so, yeah, there's this idea that we were raised in a certain way, and so that comes off in our own parenting. And the cool thing is that about, I think more so in the last couple of generations, we've wanted to do things different, right? And we've made this really conscious effort to say, like, I'm not going to do what my parents did, or I've kind of recognized that that's not the greatest and like it hurt me or it didn't feel good to me. So, like, I'm not going to do this. And I think that's really part of this conversation is I don't think it's really like this crazy idea, right? She says, "Where did we get the crazy idea?" Um, it's almost like that, the way you put it, Stephanie's like, it's not so crazy to think that like somebody disrespects me and that doesn't feel good, and then I want to disrespect them back. Or like I want to meet their energy or like match their behavior, right? I think that's really understandable and a really like honest way to say because we all do that, right? Like nobody wants to be talked to like that. Nobody wants to be ignored. Nobody wants to be like, okay, I have to say this a million times. You're not listening. Why? Um, and I think the reality in the way she's speaking about it, particularly with this quote, is that punishment or I should say discipline was often punishment focused for a long time, right? And this is like generational when she started coming out with stuff in the 80s. I think parenting then was pretty punitive, right? It was very punishment based. So like you did this, now I punish you. And a lot of it was really harsh. A lot of it was spanking, physical, like you said, aggressive. Um, and so I think that's kind of where she's coming from in particular is that like instead of making them feel worse and engaging in that, right? It's like they're going to do better when they feel better. So that's more of a better approach because we're going to get to the heart of the issue and actually motivate true change in behavior. So, yeah, I love your take on it and I thank you so much for commenting and engaging. It's really helpful and hopefully we learn better with that. So, yeah, if anybody else has any comments on that, you can throw it in the chat. Um, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. I want to kind of just touch briefly. This is all the information that's on the flyers. It's really just the information we can look forward to learning tonight. I really want to give you guys, hopefully, new information about effective parenting and discipline, how to create respectful relationships. So, this is kind of key to what Stephanie was talking about. I do think that positive discipline is a really good approach for that because it really prioritizes the relationship with you and your kids. And so that'll be super helpful, hopefully. We're going to explore your views on your own parenting, your own discipline. And I've got a couple of slides coming up about that so that you can just kind of reflect. And I have some time at the end as well where we can do that together. And then I just want you guys to get connected. A lot of these, the purpose of one of the big purposes of these classes is to connect you guys with other parents. You can receive feedback, support, I know the virtual setting is not crazy ideal, but I do think it gives us all a better chance of being able to come. And so there's pros and cons there, but the hope is that you can just connect. And if you find somebody you really identify with or relate to, you guys can share your information. The chat has a private message function, so you guys can do that if you need to or want to. But those are our objectives. Okay. So, what I want to kind of get us talking about, and this is part of one of those objectives, and that is learning more about your own style of parenting. If you don't know what it's called or any of the terminology, that's okay. I just want you guys to think a little bit about what is your style of parenting? If you could kind of come up with some themes or you kind of can you have any language of like, oh, well, I'm like kind of soft here, or I kind of do these things, or I like this, or this is what I prioritize. Feel free to share that either verbally or in the chat. I just want to get us talking about what is your style of parenting and how were you parented? Even if you don't want to say, you can just kind of think about this for a little bit. Sometimes it's helpful. I get a lot of people who are very okay with putting stuff in the chat. And so if you need a little nudge to do that, please don't hesitate to do it. I,
Um,
I, I tend to read it all. Go ahead.
yeah, so I was about 10 and 9 years younger than my sisters, and so my parents pretty much let me do whatever. Um, I was
Oh,
a good child, like I didn't get in trouble, but like I really didn't have too much discipline. Um, Not that I can recall, and I do have my children now, and it's hard for me to stay on them because the one doesn't do anything. Like I've told her a billion times, like you need to clean up your room, and it's like, okay, I'm on it, I'm doing it, and she cannot do it. I don't know what the issue is. And
Mm,
it's and then I'll do the whole like, okay, if you don't do this, you're not going to be able to do other things. But then I don't like hold her to it.
right. And so thank you so much for commenting, Marissa. It's because it sounds like you were parented maybe a little bit with like a permissive style or more permissive style from your parents. And it also sounds like maybe that's kind of happening in your parenting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they were
Um,
just kind of tired by the time I came along and let me, I was always with my friends and sleepovers, it's not that they never told me no. And I knew there was, and I shouldn't say there was no discipline, but it was the whole threatened by spanking. But I didn't really get spankings too often.
yeah.
So
And so, because I'm hearing you say, thank you so much for like being vulnerable and sharing with us. It really means a lot to me and hopefully to other parents. But do you feel like that kind of like permissive style that you experienced and what you're describing is like, okay, I am trying really hard to get her to do these things that she needs to do for like a bunch of reasons. She needs to do these things, right? But then I'm like, I can't get her to do it. I'm not really sure why. And then when I put in a limit or like a boundary, I end up like, I just call it like we don't follow through, right? Like we're not consistent with following through. N- Does that sound like pretty
yeah,
accurate?
it
Okay,
does. I don't feel like I hold the line. And so it's just obviously it's like an empty threat then for her to
right,
not get to do something.
right. And then, they see that and they learn that and they go, oh, okay, like this is just how it's going to go. And, like I said, I appreciate your transparency and just like leveling because I think all of us to a degree do that because parenting is like really, really hard. Um, I tell people all the time, like, I went to officer boot camp. It's harder than the military. The military was hard. It's harder than anything I've ever done. Any job I've ever had, anything I've ever done, being a parent is the hardest. So, and I don't know about you guys if you identify with that. So I want to say this is why we struggle, right? Because if it were easy, we wouldn't struggle, right? And so that's kind of like the beauty and the beast of it, which is I think you're having like some really practical and I think really common problems when it comes to permissive style parenting. And hopefully, I'm going to give you some stuff that you can work with and maybe some strategies specifically for the things that bug you the most or the things that are presenting the most. But I want to say, just like kind of gearing back more towards this slide is Marissa's experience, which is I don't know if that's the most common, but it's really interesting, right? To hear that like, okay, I was parented in a really permissive way. My parents were just kind of like exhausted. I was much different in age than my previous sibling. And so they were kind of just like, you're on your own, right? And there's pros and cons to that. I'm sure, you've kind of identified, or at least I hear you saying that, right? And then there's this like, and that's how I'm kind of parenting, right? Which is interesting because I do think that without a whole lot of thought, I mean, we do what we learn, right? And I've talked about this in a lot of my courses, and I'll probably repeat myself. And that is like as kids, we model what our parents do. And I think that carries along into adulthood, particularly when we are met with the task of parenting. Because it's like, okay, nobody told me how to do this. I like had a baby or whatever. And now here I am. And like, I have to figure this thing out, right? And they always talk like there's no handbook and who teaches us how to do all this stuff. I mean, really like it's ingrained in us. So I think that the most helpful part of this hopefully is just some reflection, exactly what Marissa just did. I hope I'm saying your name right. What she just did, right? Which is like, okay, I kind of noticed myself doing this. And there's this level of like, okay, I can see how that didn't really work as a kid for me, or maybe there were some things that were good and bad. And then like, here's what I'm struggling with. And then how do I change it, right? And so that's perfect fodder for tonight. So like if you're not willing to kind of talk about it, which is okay, just think about it, right? Just kind of reflect, what's your style of parenting? How were you parented? Do those match? Do they kind of line up? Or do they feel drastically different? Um, Andrew says in the chat, I think the term discipline is interesting. Until not that long ago, I associated it with punishment rather than a personal practice of self-improvement and commitment to achieve desired outcomes. I really like that, Andrew. I think the reality is like a lot of people do. A lot of people associate the word discipline with punishment. And that's we'll get to that in one of the slides where I teach you guys or just kind of broach the subject of the word discipline and the roots. It might be helpful to just go into that now since we had a comment about it. But if you think about it, and this is part of positive discipline too, is we're doing this exercise of like thinking about what words, terms, feelings come up when you think about the word discipline. I think more often than not, Andrew, a lot of people feel there's a lot of negativity when we talk about discipline, right? It's bad. Somebody's being corrected. Something's coming in and it's like, nope, that's not right, right? You're being punished. You didn't do it right. You didn't do it at all. And the reality is when we talk about the word discipline, the root of that word is disciple, right? And the meaning of the word disciple was more in line with a teaching and student relationship, right? Especially if we think about like the root of the word disciple was used a lot in the Bible about the disciples who were learning. They were being taught something, right? They were students of whatever rabbi or Jesus or whatever. So that's kind of where that root comes from, but it's very far removed for us because we think like discipline, oh, that's negative, right? Somebody's being punished. And so instead, it's really the way we try to look at it in positive discipline and just in my practice in general is it's a teacher-student relationship, right? We are teaching our kids, guiding them, right, to learn how to be, get the achieved desired outcomes, practice self-improvement, right? And so I think it's such a healthy shift, such a healthy paradigm shift to think of discipline not in terms of punishment, but in terms of learning, right? And it's certainly, as we were talking about earlier, with Stephanie, I think shared, like we can take some of that edge off too. It helps us if we have that paradigm shift of like parenting is not punishment or discipline or in that sense, right? Discipline is not punishment. It's more so like learning. Okay, you're very obviously missing the message, kids. Like you're not getting the lesson because you're not doing the thing, right? So like where are we going wrong in this teaching process that you have not done the thing? Rather than thinking of it like, man, they really don't like me. They must hate me because of how little they listen to me, right? So I think with a lot more like help and context and like insight, we can kind of come to a different conclusion. Um, but also, like I said, it takes a big paradigm shift a lot of times, and especially like helping us work through those emotions when our kids do stuff that's actually truly frustrating and difficult and what we would argue as like disrespectful, right? So we have another parent, Claudio. I fall more on the strict side. I get quite frustrated when they don't follow the instructions. I feel I don't do a good job to remedy the situation, meaning to redirect them and or motivate them to do what is expected. Um, okay. Thank you so much for sharing. I think the reality is so, and maybe you guys are kind of verbalizing that like we had a parent who was on the permissive side and now we might have a parent who's a little bit more on the strict side or we would call that like the authoritarian side. Maybe not quite. We can kind of get more into that and I'll give you guys more language and kind of what all that stuff means. I've got some nice helpful charts in the next slide. But it sounds like, right, if you're, first of all, the frustration, I can totally understand how you would feel frustrated by that because I feel frustrated by that when my kids don't follow the instructions. And I can almost guarantee they don't typically follow instructions on the first try. I have young kids. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And the 2-year-old, we're on a totally different parenting wavelength than with the 5-year-old, just because of her developmentally, her age. My 5-year-old is going to be 6 soon. She'll be starting first grade, but yeah, it's quite frustrating when they're not following the instructions. And I say that because I think the younger the kid, the more likely is they're not following instructions really well. The older the kid, we kind of find that, you know, given some good groundwork, they're able to follow instructions better, right? Developmentally, cognitively. And yet we still see kids that have like behavioral issues where they don't listen at all and they don't follow directions and, they don't do what their parents say. And that's not uncommon. And so hopefully today we'll get you some skills and some strategies and maybe some insight into like what's happening or why, um, to help you guys out. And so I also hear you saying like, yeah, that's probably what you need too, because you're like, I don't feel like I do a good job to fix that. How do I get them to do what's expected of them? And we'll get into that today. So it could also be, right, part of the consequences or the results or the outcome, the behavior that the kids have, sometimes I believe is a direct result of our style or type of parenting. So let's jump into that. And that might really help. So some of the other questions that I was curious about getting at was, we can kind of touch briefly on these. I know there's a lot of questions here, so we don't have to answer them all right now. This actually we already touched on. How does it feel when your children misbehave? And that was a big one because I've heard so many parents already say, I don't feel like I know how to make them do what I want. I feel like I'm not doing a good job. Um, I feel like they're disrespecting me. I feel like they don't like me when they don't listen to me. Um, so we've talked about that, right? And then, the other question would be like, what determines our success as parents? And that's a little bit more complex. I would argue, our success as parents is, to put it simply, I think that it's a trial, right? We're trialing this, trial and error, because none of us are perfect. I've already told you guys I could not foot stomp it harder that parenting is so challenging, so hard. And so our success as in parents is like just trying, right? Putting in the work, trying, which I see all of you guys doing by being here on a Wednesday night when you could be doing something else. I know you guys all have other things to do. And so I think your success is going to be primarily like, okay, do I feel confident? Do I have the information? And can I manage my emotions as a parent, right? That's sometimes I talk about that with my families that I work with in my private practice of just like how do we handle our own emotions as parents? It's pretty paramount to our parenting. Um, okay. Thank you guys so much for sharing. It, like I said, means so much to me. It's really helpful. Um, all right, we're gonna go ahead and jump in to the first chart that I have to share with you guys, or image. And I'll try to break this down so that we can just kind of look at this. You could screenshot this if you want to. Hopefully you can all see the screen, and I'm screen sharing with all of you. Um, this chart really shows in 4 quadrants different types of parenting, the 4 major styles, we'll say, of parenting. And this XY axis is warmth on the Y axis and control or demand on the X axis. And so a lot of you have identified, or a couple of you have identified, maybe a little bit more of permissive, which is in like that first top left quadrant. And we'll just jump into this now. There's a little statement kind of summing up each style. And the permissive style is kind of summed up by you're the boss, right? Permissive is a little bit, there's few rules, low expectations, right? The control and the strictness is low. And so there's like non-directives, right? a little bit indulgent, a little bit more accepting, a little bit more lenient. We tend to avoid confrontation in the permissive style. And so you can kind of vary on that axis of like, lots of responsiveness and warmth. I see this a lot with parents are like, I could just love them hard enough, right? And I have some families that do this and feel this way. If I could, I'm just gonna love them hard enough, right? And that will like fix things or that will like make this okay. And so that turns into that really permissive, we avoid all confrontation, super warm, all the love, right? And like none of the control, none of the demands. Um, and we see, right, that it doesn't work great typically. Now I will be the one to say if you come to the classes and something works for you and I tell you that it like keep doing it if it works for you. I very much so have the motto of like, do what works, right? Don't stop doing something if it works. And don't let me tell you that something is wrong if it works for you. Now, if there are things that are happening, right, and it doesn't feel, oh, this doesn't feel right, or the behavior is there, then I would kind of urge you to look at that. Like, does it work? But I would say there are 3 out of 4 of these that typically don't work well long term. And one of those is permissive. So we'll kind of move on. On the low warmth and the low control or strictness, we have uninvolved parenting style. And that I would argue turns more into like more absent, more distant, not necessarily leaning into neglect. That might be really extreme, right? But like they have little time, maybe work, 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 or they're super, super busy, right? Competing priorities, which is a really, it's a real, it's a real issue we have, especially just I can really identify today's society and we talk like we look at the economy and like the world. It's really hard and we live in one of the most expensive places, right? Like I can imagine this really being difficult. I know for me, um, this has been a problem. I've really tried to be like, okay, um I can't have both, right? Like I can't, be with my kids all the time and work all the time. So how do I make that work? And I think that this uninvolved parenting style obviously becomes more passive, right? And while not necessarily in a category, I don't want to scare anybody and like it's like, oh, it's not necessarily neglect, but it can go that route, right? If it's really extreme. I would argue this is more so parents that are just like uninvolved, right? Or absent or distant. And I'm sure, I don't know if any of you guys can think while we're going over this, like of our own parents, like where do they fall? Um, and yeah, so I think that can be really helpful. It helps us just kind of level with ourselves, know where we're coming from, all that kind of stuff. So moving on to the next quadrant. So we just did uninvolved, bottom left quadrant. Now we're going to move on to bottom right quadrant, which is authoritarian. And I think we had a parent say like they're a little bit more on the strict side, maybe not quite authoritarian. But on that, again, that x-axis, right, we're heading more towards high demand or demandingness, right? And a little bit of the less warmth, right? So it becomes like high expectations, structured environments and autocratic, right? More punishment, like clear rules. This is the because I said so, right? I mentioned that in the very beginning that like a lot of our parents, at least I can purely admit that my parents were the because I said so parents, um, bordering on the uninvolved as well. Like I think I had both. But the reality is, these are really high expectations, lower warmth, right? More punishment. I would argue authoritarian, right? It's much more strict. It's much more like there's not a lot of explanation, there's not a lot of collaboration. And in my mind, right, when you have high demand and low warmth, we often wonder how would we feel in that situation, right? If you think about like work situation, a super high demand of work for you, but then like no warmth, right? No flexibility, no like, hey, we're gonna meet you where you are, like how you doing, right? Like no, it's very punitive. You get in trouble for everything. There's lots of punishment. Um, it feels really bad in a work environment to be led in that way, right? So we kind of move up top right quadrant with authoritative. And this is where I want everybody headed, right? And in a perfect world, this is where we would all be. This is where positive discipline really wants parents to thrive. And so this turns more into like there's demand there, right? Not necessarily really high demand or high strictness. It's not that. But there's a meeting of the two, right? There's demands, there's control, but there's lots of warmth, right? There's lots of collaboration. That's the let's talk about it parenting style. Um, Now I will say, not with all things, right? There are certain rules or certain things that are non-negotiables, and we talk about that stuff in positive discipline. It's like we don't talk about everything. But this is just like again a general view, right? Like to help you guys kind of understand it a little bit better. It's reciprocal, right? Um, there are higher expectations. This is not the permissive, like you can just kind of do your thing, you're the boss. Um, there are clear standards. It's more of a democratic parenting style for sure. And meaning it's reciprocal, meaning it's collaborative, it's responsive, right? It's not power over like authoritarian, it's power with, right? And the key here too is like it's assertive, right? There's a little bit of flexibility, but there's assertiveness. So it's not like a free for all. It's not like a okay, because I said so, it's not you're on your own. It's this kind of cool melding, I think, of all of them. If I could remake this chart, I'd put it somewhere in the middle and try to figure that out, right, with the XY axis. Because I do think that a lot of parents fear when they try something new, especially when they hear something like positive discipline. They think more along the lines of like a gentle parenting, or where it's like, oh, like let's talk about it, let's talk about your emotions, and it's not that. I think there are a lot of those types of models. I've seen at least a lot of those types of models on Instagram and like getting some traction, and this is not that. And so I don't want people to have an opinion that, oh, like that's not going to work for me. Like I need to have limit. Like this has positive discipline absolutely has limits. You set boundaries and you stick to them with your kids. It really is just going to look like, um, a lot of the principles you're going to connect before you correct. It's going to come from a place of like compassion and putting the relationship first. Really looking at the function of behavior and why a child would be behaving in what they call like a socially unacceptable way, right? And so we kind of get more into that in the second class when I start to bring in a little bit more of like the foundation of belonging and all of that. But really, that's what's happening is this idea that we kind of meld warmth with control or demands, and this more assertive, clear, reciprocal, loving but flexible parenting style emerges. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully you can kind of look, maybe place yourself somewhere. You might not be in one quadrant, right? You might fall more in the middle between two. And that's okay. Really, I just want you guys kind of getting some information, thinking about what kind of parent you are, what you lean towards, and then like, how can I shift a little? Do I need to shift at all? Am I in a good spot? Like those kinds of thoughts are going to be really helpful. Okay, so the unfortunate thing about this chart is that the XY axis is flipped. Now we've got on the Y axis, we've got like that demandingness control. And on the X, we've got the warmth. So it's going to look a little, they're all in a different spot, right? Because the XY axis was flipped. But obviously, I didn't make these, and so unfortunately they're flipped, but it's a small thing. Maybe I'm not the only one that's going to notice it. But at any rate, here's where we start to see kind of what are some of the problems that pitfalls that come from each one of these types of parenting, or what kind of kids, right, do we get when we have a specific style of parenting? And so what we'll do to keep things a little bit simpler, I'll try to just swap permissive parenting and authoritarian because that's really the only difference in this chart. And I'll read it to you guys that way so it kind of stays a little bit similar to the first slide or the previous slide. So, with permissive parenting, right, we remember on the previous slide, top left quadrant, you're the boss, few rules, non-directive, low expectations, lenient, accepting, lots of warmth, right? Like, I'm gonna just love you so hard and that's gonna fix things. Not always that way, but I find a lot of parents that are like that, just super gentle, loving people that mean so well, but we just need a little tweak in that type of parenting. So that type of parenting, right? High responsiveness or high warmth with low demands. Children tend to be dependent, right? They get a little bit more dependent on parents. I see a lot of codependent relationships. Kids from permissive parents tend to be a little bit more impulsive, right, in their behavior. Um, we talk a little bit about like lack of discipline, right? Risk taking, immature, and that's from that impulsiveness, right? And particularly when we talk about that, because kids' prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed. Um, my standard for the past 10 years, and because of the research, has been our prefrontal cortex, which is this front part of our brain. If you're looking at an image of a brain, it's this nice front chunk, and that prefrontal cortex is our executive functioning. It's impulse control, emotional regulation, planning, long-term consequences. It's like, I call it like the secretary of the brain, right? That part, for a long time, we believed it to be not fully developed until mid-20s. Some recent research came out that it's not fully developed until we're 40, which is crazy. But it helps us understand things, okay? So the reality is, of course, we would find that kids who have low demands, high warmth, more permissive parenting, that part of their brain's not fully developed, and it's not really being honed with parenting, right? Because we're a little bit more hands off, right? And so it would make a lot of sense that kids would be a little bit more impulsive, less disciplined, right? They're more risk taking. All of that comes from that prefrontal cortex not being fully developed. This talks a little bit about kids who might be more manipulative, more self-centered, right? Because they're, if we think about this from like a psychological view, right, they're not getting a lot of that give and take from what we would see in like an authoritative parenting, right? And so they're doing a lot of that themselves, and it's really hard for kids to establish problem solving, right? Working with others, not being as selfish or egocentric, right? Like we really see some of that stuff happen because they're kind of doing it on their own, right? Um, so I'm going to kind of move down bottom left quadrant in the last one, and the same in this chart, uninvolved parenting. Children from uninvolved parents, there's a typo there. Children from uninvolved parents tend to be unmotivated, um, indifferent, I would say like kind of apathetic. They can be detached, destructive, socially incompetent. So like lots of behaviors that they don't have to be productive in society or socially. Um, I can kind of get a little bit more too into the verbiage and the words they use if anybody has questions about that. Some of the words sometimes are like, ooh, these are not strength-based words, and so that's not my favorite, but we're going to work with it. Moving into the bottom right would be authoritarian parenting, which if you guys are like, why is she saying that? It's in the top left, but like I was saying, I was kind of flipping those for you guys to match the last chart. High demands, low warmth, or low responsiveness would be authoritarian, right? That's the like, do what I say, right? Because I said so, parenting. Kids who come from authoritarian parents tend to be more withdrawn, more apathetic. They can be shy in girls or more aggressive in boys, unmotivated. This is saying incompetent, right? Lacking skills, right? Um, and finally, when we look at the top right, we've talked a little bit about authoritative parenting and like where I hope we're moving. Kids from authoritative tend to be more self-assertive, right? They're more independent. They're more able to problem solve, make decisions for themselves, right? A little bit more friendly, a little bit more cooperative. Definitely motivation changes when we have kids who have parents who are authoritative. They become more competent, more socially, they have more behaviors that are socially useful. That's a lot of language in positive discipline. Like I said, we can kind of I can explain that a little bit. I'll get more to that in the second class. But really, this is like kids who succeed, right, in society, who turn into adults who succeed in society. And that's kind of where that socially useful or socially useless terminology comes from. I think it's kind of harsh, but I understand how they're using it. So this is really, if you look at this chart and the previous slide, these are really kind of helping us like, do I see my kids somewhere on here, right? Do I see some of these behaviors or some of these things that are worded pretty negatively, I will admit, but do we see some of these negative behaviors and does it correlate with my type of parenting? It might and it might not, right? Now, I also recognize there's a caveat that we can bring up. I think in the last iteration of this course last year, I did a co-parenting like divorce presentation. I'm not doing that again this year. Um, and I can explain why if anyone has questions about that. I used to do that because there was a lot of questions or parents wanting that, but in my opinion, the format of this class can't handle that topic, to be honest. It's just too it's too big, it's too emotionally driven, and there I think the need is higher for that particular presentation. And so we're kind of filling in some other needs and other desires of parents. But what I will say is this sometimes can feel like a struggle if you are if you're co-parenting or if you have you're parallel parenting or you have a blended family or there's divorce or there's separation or you're just parenting solo, right? Like there's definitely going to be some nuance to that, and I will not like pretend that I know or give you some sort of like, oh, this is how each of you could, fix the situation because I don't think I'm capable to do that. And again, in this type of setting. So I just want to recognize that some of this you might have to generalize. Some of this, when we talk about positive discipline, you might have to alter. You might have extra questions about like, how do I apply this if I have a co-parent who's authoritarian and I'm like more authoritative or more permissive? How do we like meet, right? Those are really tough questions. And I think like I have to say, you guys know your kids, you know your family dynamics. There's always help to be had if you can get resources. I know Ani, she's like the queen of resources. They're doing a parenting class, which is awesome. That will really help if you could get both parents to go or refer the other one to go, maybe to next year and you go to this one. But there's going to be a variety of ways to handle, the parenting struggles that come with also having to do this with someone else. Um, and it's not cordial, I'll say, or it's not ideal. And so I get that. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the two charts or just this idea of differing parenting styles? Particularly when it comes to these four: permissive, uninvolved, authoritarian, and authoritative. I'm willing to answer any and all questions if you've got them. Throw them in the chat. Go ahead and get on your mic if you'd like. Because otherwise, what we're going to do just with this slide is a self-reflection, right? And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, is with all of that information, particularly this slide, right? I'm going to go back to slide 6. You've got the PDF in the chat. You can screenshot this at any time. Where would you place yourself on this scale? Do you think you lean a little bit of a certain way, or do you feel like you're not on there at all? I mean, that would be interesting to hear, and I'm totally interested in helping you if you feel like you're not here. And you might just be, like I said, somewhere in the middle or in, maybe the hot spot right in the center of like some days I'm this and some days I'm that. Um, but regardless, the reflection will be really helpful if you can think about this. What is my style of parenting? Um, and does it differ a little bit on day to day? Or like, okay, how charged am I? Where am I at with my mental health? How stressed am I? So I would say start there, right? What is your style? What is your type of parenting? What do you lean towards most naturally? And then I would say your family of origin, where you come from. How were you parented? Really kind of, I know maybe for a lot of people there's pain there. I don't know about you guys, but my parents certainly made mistakes, and there's pain there. And so maybe it's not like the most pleasant thing to do is to like, let me think about how I was parented and all those mistakes that they made or the hurt. And I think if you can do this in a way that's um, just kind of like thinking of it more in terms of research, right? Like what can I see that my parents did, right? Just to kind of productively do this part. For some of you, there might be a ton of pain. There might be abuse or neglect or trauma. And if that's the case, I'm so sorry. And I want you to be able to just like look at where you come from. How was I parented? Because I do believe this influences us, right? And every family, every couple, every person, parent that I meet with in my practice, we go over this. We talk about where'd you come from? What was your childhood like? How were you parented? Right? And this is where we start because this is our foundation as children. We grew up, we were kids once, we were parented. What was modeled to us, right? What behavior was normal? How were we treated when we did something? Because I also believe, as a specialist and expert in trauma, that also is what triggers us as parents, right? Or activates us, whatever we want to call it. The reality is that that stuff just doesn't go away, right? That pain or that hurt or just whatever it was, right? Like the harshness, the strictness, it doesn't go away. And so just feeling it out if you can and you feel safe doing that, right? What's my family of origin like? What was my childhood like? Um, and does that affect my style, right? Am I, we'll get to the next bullet, but your spouse, your partner, your co-parent, grandparents, if they help raise your kids, aunts, uncles, teachers, mentors, coaches, what's their style of parenting, right? And I go down the rabbit hole, and that's because this is what I do, right? So I know some of you might be like, "Whoa, this is too much." Like, go there, right? Think about it because first of all, if you have a spouse or you have a partner or you're with somebody, you live together or you don't, right? But they help parent your kids. What does this look like for them? What's their style of parenting? What's their type of parenting? How do they co-parent your kids? Do they help co-parent your kids, right? And what was their family of origin and childhood like? What was their upbringing like? Um, it's incredibly crucial to talk about and to just know, be aware of. So if you can do this in a safe way, in a healthy way, talk to each other about it, right? Like, or grandparents, maybe they're a little softer now that they're helping raise the kids. My mom actually comes and helps me a couple days a week, which I am so grateful for, and I realize that I'm blessed for that. Um, but I also have to work it through with her, right? Because it's like, what kind of parenting, how's she parenting the kids? And am I okay with that? And how do we come together and talk about it? And of course, this is important to me because this is what I do. And you know, most of my family, if not all my family, knows that. And so it's pretty normal if I sit down with them and want to talk about it, or have a conversation about it. But maybe the people around you be like, what is going on? Why are you trying to talk to me about this? Look, I'm just learning all this information and I want to change it, right? I want to make it better. I want to be more consistent. And so I just want to learn about you. And that can be really helpful, if you word it that way. I think like teachers, mentors, coaches, we might be much less involved, right? And we might be much less confident or likely to speak to those people. Um, like I said, I teach teachers and they've actually have so much positive research with positive discipline in schools. So like teachers, mentors, coaches, people that are trained in positive discipline, the outcomes are better for kids. So obviously, you and I on this call are not going to make a difference in all the schools and all the, doing this, but like we could talk about that. We could ask questions. We could advocate for that. We could, encourage the schools that are already doing that. And I know a lot of the schools in San Marcos District have been doing this stuff for a while. So it's really important, I think, to focus on all of that, right? Because, if our kids are there, they're also being parented in that way, with teachers. So, part of the self-reflection, moving on to the next bullet, how flexible am I with changing my style? Is there a better way? Or do I need a little improvement here? I'm good here, right? Can I change it? I just speaking from experience, I guess, with my own parents and grandparents, right? They weren't very flexible with changing the style. It was there. I will say there are some that we call evidence-based and some that are not evidence-based. And positive discipline is one of the evidence-based parenting programs, which really just means providers can use this because it's been researched to be effective. And so, I'll give you an example. It's like hypnotherapy, people being hypnotized. That's not an evidence-based clinical therapy, right? Because there's not enough clinical data, research showing consistent outcomes. Now, not like downing hypnotherapy or anything. If you like it and it works for you, great. That's not what I mean. But just there's a difference in the science backing whether we can consider something evidence-based or not. So, positive discipline is one of those. And if it's not the best fit for you, please, please, please just either keep coming to these because it's not the only thing I do or talk about, but it is one of the things that I feel like has really been foundational and kind of life-changing for me as a provider pre-kids. And now that I have my own children, man, has it really like helped me. It's really changed the way I've been able to parent my kids. And I think I definitely feel better for it. So I'm gonna jump into, we're kind of moving into the second half of the presentation. The chat's a little quiet, totally okay. If anybody has questions, suggestions, comments, concerns, throw them in. I'd love to respond to those. If not, I'm gonna keep on trucking and hopefully get all this good information in for the second half. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a background. I've already kind of started talking about this. The history of positive discipline, right? Like I said, this is positive discipline is a parenting approach that's founded on the psychological theory that was introduced by Alfred Adler and Rudolf Dreikurs in Vienna. This was in the 1920s and 30s. They were coming up with this psychological theory that the basis of all human uh, drive was to feel like we belong and that we're significant. And so these guys they're doing all their research. They were coming up with this psychological theory. And then I would say more they were changing they were working with parents obviously because this was a lot geared towards kids and their behavior. And it was like I said on the coattails of this era of parenting that was children should be seen and not heard, right? And that was really, really common and pervasive back then. And so they really changed the game by doing a bunch of research on kids and their behavior. And they came out with this idea that um, kids thrive better when they're treated respectfully, right? So they treated children more respectively, and they argued that outcomes got better. Kids' social and behavioral problems plummeted. They felt better and they acted better, right? And so they that was kind of their framework, right? Instead of the children should be seen and not heard, it was more so like listen to kids, treat them respectfully, but also don't spoil and pamper them, right? It's not encouraging and it certainly does not help with their problems, right? Any of the issues that we see. So it was this kind of, I believe, one of the first times people in the psychology field during that time started to say, let's not just like make these kids do what we want them to and, they're kind of just objects here, right? But like, let's have this democratic parenting approach, right? So more so they have a say, right? Even though they're kids, this was, wildly inappropriate at the time, but they wanted kids to have a say in things, right? They wanted it to be less one way and more two way. And there's a time and a place for this too. We talk about in positive discipline. This is not like a all the time kids have say and all the time it's a conversation. This is really we're guided by their age predominantly and their like developmental stage, right? So if we also have kids with disabilities, we would also kind of what's their kind of developmental age and how do we that's kind of how we base how much we're collaborating, right? Like we're not really collaborating as much with 1 and 2 year olds, right? We're doing more of that collaboration as they get a little older. But I mean, there's still some collaboration to be done, but not quite in the same way. I'm sure a lot of you guys who have toddlers, like I said, I have a 2 year old and it's very fresh in my mind. She's in that like mind stage, I do it stage. So there's not a whole lot of like, um, negotiation there, right? There's a lot of tantrums because she's learning how this whole thing works. And it's very normal. So, at any rate, furthering this conversation of the history of positive discipline, around the 80s, Jane Nelson, who we took the quote from at the beginning of the presentation, and Lynn Lott, her colleague, they took this psychological theory and research that Adler and Drakers did in the early 1900s, and they started doing a lot of their own research in the 70s and the 80s, and they started formulating this positive discipline approach. They took a lot of the scientific data from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and then they started doing their own, right? Like obviously this needs to be modernized. They were the guys that did this were in Vienna, they were in a different country. There was a lot of stuff happening in the world at that time, and so these psychologists, they started doing this. And so they started creating manuals and they started really researching into a variety of populations, like 0 to 3, 0 to 5, elementary age or early adolescence, teenagers. They started to come out with, you know, specifically with kids who had behavioral problems or were very resistant or oppositional. They started doing things, all kinds of special populations to really just help parents in their own unique situation. And so that's kind of how it started. We're going to shift gears and talk a little bit more about positive discipline and the approach for effective discipline. Um, I will describe this slide is the foundation of positive discipline. And really, to simplify it, there's 5 criteria. And again, this all comes from this model and from this theory, right? So this is not the end all be all, but in terms of positive discipline, the 5 criteria that they believe exists for effective discipline The first one is that discipline should help kids feel a sense of connection. And this is based on, I talked about it earlier with Adler and Draker's, their research that the foundation of learning and desire for human beings was to feel belonging and significance. In 2 weeks, when I do part two, I have a whole chart where we talk about belonging and significance and how that plays out in behavior. So if you're interested, please come back. So one, discipline should help kids feel a sense of connection, right? They belong and they're significant in the family context. Two, discipline should be mutually respectful and encouraging, right? And the way that positive discipline does this is we're kind and firm at the same time. And we're going to get into that more. I'll give you more language on that. I think that's more so in the second one as well. I give you specific language, specific like things to learn and quotes, things you can say. Effective discipline is effective long term. So that's kind of what I brought up earlier when we were talking about permissive, uninvolved, authoritarian, and authoritative. 3 out of 4 of those are not effective long term. Maybe the permissive could be effective like short term. Maybe authoritarian is even effective short term. But what we find, particularly in the data, is that none of those approaches are effective long term. Authoritative parenting is the only one that's shown to be effective in a long-term context. And so, really, what that means is that the discipline considers what the child is thinking, feeling, learning, and deciding about him or herself and the world, right? And then how to act, what to do in the future to survive or thrive. And so that takes more into context. It's not just this short term, don't do that because I said so, right? This is going to be more of that like long-term approach because we're trying to teach kids how to think, how to feel, how to learn. What are they deciding about the world, right? And this is also foundational when we talk about trauma, right? Our beliefs are shaped by trauma, our beliefs about ourselves, about other people, about the world. And so what we really want is discipline that considers these things. And I bring up trauma just in the context of trauma has the ability to change these things, and I do believe parenting does as well. Okay, fourth criteria about discipline is that it has to teach important social and life skills. And so this goes back to that, what we talked about, the word disciple, right? Discipline, whatever word you think of, it might be interesting if you guys want to do this. When you hear the word discipline, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Right? It could be a feeling, it could be, an idea, it could be a thought, it could be anything, a word, Um, for a lot of people, and I usually do that exercise when we're in person, right? Um, what words do you think of? And usually, right, we're not thinking about teaching. We're not thinking about learning. We're not thinking about mistakes and coming back from those and like teaching moments. And right, it usually doesn't occur in that way. For me, I've always thought of discipline really with a negative connotation. And I think a lot of us do. Yeah, someone said restraint. Yeah, which to me inherently has a pretty negative context, right? We're being held back, we're being restrained, we're being held down, right? Um, and that's one person. Thank you, Claire, for putting in. But the reality is that we want to think of discipline. In order for it to be effective, we have to think of discipline as it's teaching, right? It can't be that like negative, punitive thing because that's not teaching them important life skills, right? Social skills. And so some of those, right, that positive discipline really highlights is respect. That's the first one, because relationship is pretty much the foundation. And when we talk about positive discipline, that's what they foot stomp. Respect, current concern for others, problem solving, cooperation, skills necessary to contribute to home, school, and your community. That's what we want to do, right? That's what discipline needs to do is teach. Discipline should invite children to discover how capable they are. And I think the reality here and the way positive discipline does this is it's really heavy on encouragement. And there's a way they kind of differentiate encouragement from praise. Praise is more outcome based, right? Like, oh, you did a good job, right? Instead, encouragement is like, wow, like, how did you think to do that? Or I really love the stuff that you used here. Can you tell me how you did that? Right? Like the way that we approach encouragement is a little different than we use praise. And there's a reason why we do that. Encouragement basically is giving them the ideas of, or the skill of power, personal power and autonomy, right? Rather than saying like, "Oh, you did a good thing," we're saying you are good, right? And how are you doing that, right? You have the ability to do these things. And it's whatever's within you, right? So we're inviting them by the way of discipline to discover how capable they are by encouraging them. And again, in the second session, we'll get way more into how to do those things. Okay, so I really I don't know if this is helpful for some people. I hope it is. It's helpful for me because when I look into something, if I've never heard of positive discipline before, I would really want to know, like, hey, is this research backed? Like, and this is so that you don't necessarily have to look this up or question whether or not this is a legitimate thing that you can trust and you can work towards. There's a lot of research backing for positive discipline, and I couldn't put it all in a slide or even talk about it all in 2 hours, but I did want to give you guys some of this because I think it's helpful. And as a parent, it's what I would want. So, without getting too in the weeds about these particular studies, I'm going to share some more information, resources with you at the end. Um, but really, what this looks like is this is giving you some hardcore data. There was a study done where a school-wide implementation of positive discipline in one of the Sacramento elementary schools. Suspensions after this program, positive discipline was used with the teachers, right? So this is also a program that can be taught to parents and to teachers and schools, right? People who work in schools. Suspensions in this school decreased from 64 to 4. Vandalism decreased from 24 to 2. And the teachers reported improvement in the classroom atmosphere, behavior, attitudes, and academic performance. Smaller studies have had similar results. Um, Studies have repeatedly demonstrated that a student's perception of being part of the school decreases the incidence of socially risky behavior, which is, we talk about socially risky behavior, that's like extreme emotional distress, suicidal thoughts or attempts, cigarette, alcohol, drug use, violent behavior. That's that socially risky behavior that we talk about. If a student perceives that they're connected, right? They belong, they're connected to the school in some way, those things plummet, right? And academic performance has been shown to improve. So, what this also has shown in the studies is that there's significant evidence that teaching younger kids the social skills have a protective effect that lasts into adolescence, which is awesome because it means we could start early and, really get that lasting benefit. Students that are taught social skills much more likely to succeed in school, less likely to engage in those problem behaviors. And I could go on and on. Like I said, there's a website I'll share with you guys at the end. I think I included it, and it has just tons of research that really just backs the idea that positive discipline is really effective and a good approach to use. Now, a lot of these were school-based, and there's a reason why I brought so much of the school-based stuff in, and that's because I'm geared in these presentations towards behavior in schools. That's really kind of more what they're looking for. When we talk about obviously the district, we're looking at school stuff. So when we use these positive discipline approaches, whether at school or at home, we see improvement in behavior at school and at home. So that's kind of where the context came from with that. Okay. Um, Moving on. I'm gonna take some water because I'm getting a scratchy throat. All right. Some of the common issues with parenting, we've already talked a little bit about the graph, the chart, and being on either end of those extremes, right? Either whether you're kind of really finding yourself in the strong, like authoritarian category, or you're finding yourself in a very kind of extreme permissive category. We find that this is just one of the, when I get people, I talk to families, I talk to students, I talk to parents, teachers, right? These are usually where we see kind of most extreme behaviors, right? Is when we're looking at those extreme styles of parenting. And so obviously that's going to be concerning for all of us because it's like, okay, well, these are the things I'm seeing in my kid. Maybe the teachers are kind of writing home about things or communicating with you. This is obviously going to be where this thing starts, where it's like, okay, let me look at this because I'm obviously seeing some dramatic behavior in my kids. And in the most gentle and loving way possible, I tell parents if there are if there are behavioral problems with children, right? We always want to look at parenting. And I'm saying that as a therapist of 15 plus years. I worked with kids. That was all I worked with, probably for the last 8. Um, and predominantly when I was meeting with kids, I was really prioritizing meeting with parents. And that's not to say that like we're blaming people or even jumping to any sort of conclusions. The reality is just exactly what we talked about with that quote in the beginning, right? When kids feel better, they do better. And I think furthermore, when parents feel better, kids feel better, right? And so there's this element of like, let's look at this kid with everything, right? What's happening at school, what's happening at home, what's happening with their friends, what's happening in their community. All like it's a holistic view. We can look at all of it, and parenting is certainly one of the most important when I look at kids with behavioral challenges. So, is your parenting on one of the extremes? That's obviously something we want to look at. We want to help you shift a little. Um, Parenting out of fear, I talked about this a little bit. I find that a lot of parents do this. I've done it myself. There's a lot of fear associated with parenting. That's not something they tell you when you start this process, right? Nobody tells you like, oh my gosh, you're gonna be scared out of your mind, right? Like, what could happen if I don't do this, or what could happen if, just natural things, right? It's a very anxiety producing experience for a lot of parents. Um, and that could look like a number of things, whether I have parents who they parent their girls super strictly because they're afraid of what will happen to them, particularly with men or dating or boys if they don't, right? So we parent out of that fear. Or we parent out of fear, like anxiety of our kids hurting themselves or, injuring themselves or hurting someone else. And we kind of like pull them back, right? Rein them in a little bit. There's a lot of examples that we could come to when we talk about parenting out of fear. Do you
I
do this?
I
Okay.
have like I'm starting to like get really, really concerned right now about the way I'm parenting in regards to the whole situation with ICE in our neighborhoods and stuff like that. Because, my son is Latino and I'm scared for him and I want him to be street smart, but I feel like the way that I am dealing with it is that I am parenting out of fear and I'm just making him fearful instead of street smart. And so that has repercussions like when he's in the house now, I'm falling more into like the passive parenting because I know I'm being harsh about this particular situation. Even though I know like in general, my partner and I were mostly like authoritative, sometimes a little bit more authoritarian parents. So he does get away with a lot inside the house though.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, and I know it's so hard. I mean, the reason why I'm kind of it's hard for me to talk about because I think understanding that people have this fear, right? And it's happening in our society and it's real and it's like politics aside, right? Because we know it's very politically charged. It's just like people are afraid, okay? And let's just help people sit with that, right? And I can level with you and say it's first of all, thank you for sharing because I know to me it's really vulnerable to say those things and just to say like, look, I know I'm parenting out of fear. It's vulnerable and it's sometimes hard to admit, and yet at the same time there's so much power in that to say like, oh my gosh, I'm doing that, right? And I don't think it's helping now. I find that really interesting, and I think that when I first started back, it was like after COVID, because obviously this whole thing, I wasn't doing any classes for San Marcos for quite a few years because I actually joined the Air Force or commissioned in the Air Force. But so that's what I was doing during COVID. But it's almost like, and I know I'm relating these two things, and I hope it doesn't feel like I'm minimizing or like changing the subject or like, anything negative towards that. But it's these things in society that scare us, right? And they're it's real for us, and it's um like what do we do, right? How do we parent through these scary things? And I think the reality is you're doing the right thing, right? You're doing your best. You're like, okay, now, and then we could go all into details of like, okay, how old is he? What's going on? What neighborhood? And we don't necessarily need to do that, but I think for the purpose of today, it's like you might have just had this powerful realization that like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm making him more scared. I could do it, I could approach it a different way, right? Um, And I think that I mean, that's the best part of parenting. And that's what I really think is the strength of doing what you're doing, which is being vulnerable, being like, I don't know if I'm handling this the right way, right? Like, um, and so anyway, to just respond to that, if there's a way we can help, I hope some of this helps. Maybe, I'm going to get to some strategies, I promise. I know a lot of it sounds like, hopefully, it's not uninteresting stuff, but we'll get to some strategies and just hopefully, at the very least, we can help you realize, oh my gosh, wait a minute, my brain's doing that thing again. I don't want to parent out of fear. I want to parent him with all my values and all my information and put that foot forward, and then like, how do I do that, right? And you're gonna want to like process this outside, when you're calm and you're not in the parenting, the heat of parenting, right? Like so that you can be like, okay, well, how will I deal with this? How am I gonna like calm myself down? How am I gonna not be conquer my fear or like work with that? You know what I mean? I think that's definitely a conversation you'll have to have prior to. But
I just feel like a lot of the time, like I'm worried about infringing on his independence as he is growing up with the fear that like I'm the parent, he's our only child. Like if something happens, it's like it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. So I'm trying not to like be fearful and all that kind of stuff, but I'm also like, we gotta be like real here. Like this is a real scary situation, but I want him to still grow up and be normal.
absolutely. I mean, I hear you. I think that's like that's the goal for all of us, right? Is like I want my kid to be normal and like not be, overly afraid or anxious. And the reality is if they know too much and if they're exposed to too much, which is really the reality today, and I have a talk on social media and technology. Um we're all overexposed, right? We're all seeing like so much that we shouldn't be seeing, and that's another story, but the reality is, yeah, I want my kid to be safe and secure and like right, function normally and be happy, and like how do I do that? And so yeah, what we don't want to do is parent out of fear. Now that doesn't mean we don't approach parenting with like a here's what I'm going to teach you, these are the facts, here's what you need to do, right? Here's how you behave, this is what we expect of you, this is what the world expects of you. Like having those conversations is going to be much more helpful and beneficial for that like normality than what we do when we're really afraid, right? when I'm afraid, I want to bring them in, right? My kids, it's like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. I'm swooping in. And it's like, I know I can't do that because exactly what you're saying, right? We talk about like helicopter parenting and how that really has done some damage because we've taken kids' independence, right? There's a couple of books that I really love. One is called, I think it's called Until the Street Lights Come On. Anxious Generation, that one actually I've been talking about for years. It got really big. So there's a lot of books. If you guys are interested, I'll throw those in the chat. They're books about how we do that, how we stop parenting out of fear, because that kind of like helicopter, like I'm going to bring them in, I'm going to protect them, how that damages kids. But thank you so much, Stephanie, and I'm so sorry that those are the feelings and you have that fear and it's real, it's valid. Let's I'm going to kind of shift back and I appreciate you sharing with us. Hopefully today you're going to get some skills and some things and just this realization, this insight for you that's like, okay, I don't want to do that, right? I hope that that's incredibly helpful for you. Okay, so this goes also what we were talking about. Maybe what was it, Stephanie? I can't remember. The path of least resistance, path of least resistance, right? That's that more of like passive, like, oh my gosh, this is so hard right now, and I just can't deal with it, so I'm gonna just retreat, right? Now, I will be the first to raise my hand, and like when I'm maxed out and the kids are sick, or I'm busy. Path of least resistance is one of the things, a pitfall that I fall into, right? Because it's like, especially when we talk about kids with really like heightened behaviors, like tantrums, right? Kids that like have full meltdowns when we take away the screen or like we take away the iPad. Like, this is the thing, right? Parents run into like, I'm going to do the path of least resistance because I just don't have the bandwidth to handle that right now, right? Super common, but definitely an issue that we want to fix. I talk about this stress, overwhelm, burnout. This is a super common issue, right? I can't remember the amount of times in the last 5 years I've told my husband that I'm burnt out, right? Like it's a lot. And exactly like we're talking about life, society, right? Like our jobs, the economy, finances, family, relationships, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of stress, and there's stress for our kids, right? Academic pressures, relationship stuff, you know, what's going on in the world, fear, worry. There's a lot. So this is another really common issue, right? When parents get overwhelmed or burned out or they're so stressed. And then I mark kind of another common issue is just like skills, resources, or our toolbox. Maybe there are things that are limited there. Maybe we've never had the ability to seek therapy. We never have been able to do like parenting workshops or take off work or I mean, there's a lot of things that come in with, your toolbox. And so is your toolbox, I kind of call it your parenting toolbox, do you have that set up? If you don't, and there's skills, resources missing, like how do we build that? How do we build that with either coming to these classes, doing the other parenting course that San Marcos is putting out, doing these things on our own, getting our own like person to talk to, mentor, therapist, whoever, this is really going to help. One of the other common issues that I see, and one of the things that positive discipline really targets, is not prioritizing connection or the relationship in parenting. Sometimes I see parents who like we've kind of either damaged or not prioritized the relationship so often that it feels really like, oh my gosh, I don't even have a relationship with this kid. I'm literally just parenting them to get them through, right? I mean, I don't know if any of you guys feel that way. It's really heartbreaking when I experience families who do. And so I'm sorry if that's the current and present situation. And yet it's happened. I've known so many families where the connection and the relationship is damaged. And the best thing to do and the place to start is there, right? We can't do any of this other stuff. Like we can't do any other parenting without first repairing the relationship. Parents feeling out of control or giving up, right? We check out. I've definitely seen parents who do this, right? It's just like, oh my gosh, I'm so busy. It's like, I don't even know how to deal with that. They don't listen. I'm done, right? Constant family conflict or constant conflict in the family or in parents, right? This happens when we have just a variety of issues within the parenting context. One of the most like common issues is probably constant conflict in the relationships of parents. Cyclical or generational trauma, we talk about like unresolved generational trauma, and that's more particularly when we start talking about like, am I healed enough to like parent this kid calmly? Am I healed enough to not be triggered by their behavior and like escalate, right? That is a really, really tough one. And I will say, not easy to fix. It is possible to fix that and to heal, and yet it's just so hard. Because when we have our own trauma, I always believe, and I tell people this all the time, when we have unresolved trauma from our own childhood, it shows up most in our spousal or significant other relationship and our relationship in parenting with our kids. And it's like, oh, great. But like, we got to fix that, right? Like we got to try to pay attention to ourselves and try to resolve and heal and grow. Um, Lastly, common issue would be like not using discipline to teach, but to punish or correct, right? And if we find ourselves always doing that, it's a correction or a punishment, but we haven't, like the last time we checked in on like, when did I teach, right? Right now, I'm remembering the last time, 10 times I interacted with this kid as a parent, I've been punishing or correcting. We gotta like, let's make these even. Like maybe let's get 5 and 5, right? Like we'll start small and kind of shimmy more towards let me have just as many parental interactions with my kid in a teaching way or a disciple way as I am in the punishing and correcting way, if that makes sense. I'm gonna type these books in the chat. I think this one's right. So there's some books that I was mentioning that I threw in the chat as well. Okay, so when we talked a little bit about like the history of positive discipline and then those five basic uh, key kind of conditions for positive discipline or discipline in general, one of those things, let's kind of look back at that. The first one, helping children. So the criteria, the first criteria for effective discipline was sense of connection, right? Discipline should help kids feel a sense of connection. And that's what this slide is all about. We're going to start at that foundation, that priority, which is the relationship, because connection it should be a priority in our parenting, and I'll tell you why. Research consistently tells us that kids are hardwired from birth to connect with others, right? So that's like if you look at the foundation of attachment, I don't know if you guys have heard those studies with the monkeys. They did studies on attachment with the female chimpanzees and gorillas, and it's basically kids, babies, right? Their neurons are hardwired from birth to connect with another human being. Typically, it's the mother first, and then it's the secondary caregiver, right? And so, hardwired to connect with others. And children that feel that sense of connection from the newborn stage and up, when they feel that sense of connection with their community, the family, the school, they're less likely to behave. That's kind of simply put, right? So it's telling us that kids are hardwired to connect. This is one of the main reasons, right? The foundation of attachment is all, right? That secure attachment is what we're looking for with kids. Safe, secure attachment to the primary caregiver, which is typically the mother, and the secondary caregiver. And what that means is that healthy attachment gives them that healthy sense of connection, right? So, to be successful contributing members of society, kids must be able to learn necessary social and life schools, right? Life skills. So positive discipline is based on that understanding that discipline must be taught and that discipline teaches. And so what I would say is, what does connection look like in your household? What does connection look like in your student's school? And so these might not be questions that you can answer right now. They might be questions that you don't want to answer right now. That's okay. Just think about it, right? Like, what does connection look like in your household? Start there. Is there a time when your kid feels a sense of connection to you, to your spouse or your partner? Maybe if you're a single parent, the siblings, an aunt, an uncle, grandparents, people at school, teachers, coaches, anyone in their life, right? What does connection look like for your kid, for your student? Um, and if we want to ask ourselves another question, because most kids, their world right now is either home or school, right? And so what does it look like in your house and what does it look like in their school? Do they feel connected at school? Do they feel like they have a sense of belonging with a group of friends or teachers that understand them or care for them or a coach that really, motivates them and empowers and encourages them. If you don't know, just ask. Yeah, like, hey, I have this really weird question. I was doing this class, so I could learn how to be a better parent, and I just want to know, do you feel connected at school? Do you feel connected here at home? Like, and they might say, well, what does that even mean, right? Like, well, I don't know. Do you feel like you belong? Do you feel like you're heard? Do you feel like we respect you and we care? Do you feel that sense of like connection with us, right? I think that would absolutely be a phenomenal question to ask and just like be brave and hear the answers and know that you're doing the right thing by exploring and changing things and shifting things and asking questions. Okay, so we're gonna get a little bit into the like ways to improve. And I've probably talked a little bit about some of these. And so hopefully it doesn't sound like we're repeating. And again, in the second session, we're gonna get much more in depth into some of the tools. So some of the basic tools of positive discipline include, we've talked about this already, like mutual respect, right? Adults model firmness by respecting themselves and the needs of the situation by respecting the needs of the child, right? So we model firmness because firmness is incredibly important. We're going to respect ourselves enough as parents to be firm with our kids, but we're also going to be kind, right? And respect the needs of our child because this is not like a one-way street, right? So that's how we do that mutual respect. And this is going to look different to a lot of families. You're going to have to kind of like use your gut instinct, your best judgment, figure out. I always talk to families about figuring out what your values are, right? And then how do we show mutual respect to one another? Have we ever talked about what respect looks like or how they're supposed to model respect? Do I, as a parent, really model respect to my kids? Do I take into account their needs? Do I respect their needs? Am I a little bit flexible there, right? Like when they tell me, oh, this is what I need, this is what I want, right? Like, am I able to do that? That's really important. Mutual respect also comes by way of improving that relationship, right? So, like, if our trust has been damaged or the relationship itself, due to just like anger, feelings, resentment, frustration, has that kind of damaged the relationship? And if it has, we basically just have to start from like not from scratch, but we start from the bottom up and we really do our best to apologize, to repair. Hey, this is where I've been wrong as a parent. If your kids can do this, if they're at an age, maybe this gives them the freedom or the opportunity to say where they've, messed up or where they're willing to take some accountability. Um, if they're not, you could kind of pose that question. Hey, I'm willing to say like I've done this, this, and this wrong. I want to change this. What about you? Like, what do you think in this relationship could change on your end? Um, that could look like a calm conversation, hopefully, if we can do that in a really genuine way. Identifying, so this comes next, identifying the belief behind the behavior. So, effective discipline, and this is where positive discipline really, I think, foot stomps the belief behind behavior. They recognize the reasons that kids do what they do, and then we work to change those beliefs rather than just try to change the behavior, right? So, a lot of times, right, we might have, for example, there was a parent who mentioned, like, well, my kid doesn't listen to me, they must not like me, right? What we might have been doing, have we identified the belief behind their behavior? Or are we just trying to change the behavior, right? Like, stop not listening to me, stop ignoring me, right? Like, why do they ignore? Do they believe that they're never good enough? Do they believe that they're not listened to and they're not respected? They don't have any collaboration or flexibility in the parental relationship, right? Like, and this, I don't know what that is, right? Because I don't know this particular scenario, but like, let's try to look at that. What does my kid believe that leads them to act in these ways? And so in number two, there's a big chart that I give you guys, and you can screenshot it when you're in the class when I do that presentation. And it talks very specifically about beliefs behind behavior, and we'll really jump into that and get more in depth perhaps for each particular scenario that you guys are dealing with. It's super helpful. So that's another way that we improve our behavior is we identify the belief and we don't just try to change behavior. We really try to improve our communication and our problem solving skills, right? So communication, I used to do a whole course on that too. I don't think we're doing that one. I think I did that one when we had more classes, but really just like, how do I effectively communicate, right? Do I actively listen? Do I look my kids in the eye? Am I undistracted? Right? When I talk to them, am I giving them space to speak? Am I being respectful and listening to hear, right? Like, am I summarizing what they say? All of these like really effective communication tips. This is all going to be super helpful when you're parenting because, kids aren't going to respond, and you probably find this when they're being talked at, or they're not being listened to, or they're not, we're not like reflectively, okay, wait, let me make sure I heard you right. This is what you think, right? Like, this is what I'm hearing you say. There's a level of respect that comes in when we can like level with our kids and communicate with them in that way. Um, Improving our parenting by discipline that teaches, right? It's not permissive, it's not punitive, so we're not just punishing all the time, right? We want to teach. So like I was saying, if you could think about your ratio, okay, in the last day, how many times did I correct or punish versus teach? Like, use parenting as teaching moments. Find your ratio maybe, and like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do, instead of like 10 to 1, I'm going to do 8 to 2 or 8, right? You see what I'm saying? It's just like, try to get more in line with teaching. And this doesn't mean, that we just say like, all bets are off, I'm just going to sit here and teach, right? That's not how we do things. We still want to have boundaries and limits. But I also believe that kids need to be taught almost more than you would think they need, particularly when it comes to like chores and cleaning and things like that. I always tell parents, um, first, make them watch you do it, then do it with them, then you watch them do it, right? And then you let them do it on their own, and then you come in and say, okay, here's where we went wrong, or okay, this is right. You did a great job here. Like, here's what we're missing. What are we missing? Right. And so that's kind of the method that I tell parents to teach their kids when it comes to cleaning their room, doing laundry, like taking out the trash, right? Because then there's no like, I don't know how to do it. Right? And we understand too, like, we do things differently than our kids. I can guarantee it. I'm going to clean the dishes way different than my kids will clean the dishes. But teaching them to do it, right? And again, I have a 5-year-old, not a 15-year-old. And so I can take that into account. But like, I'm going to teach her, right? Like, you're going to do it with me. You're going to watch me do it, right? And then next week, like every night for dinner, you're going to watch me clean the pots. And then next week, I'm going to stand with you and I'm going to clean them with you, right? Like, and so it's this like really kind of drawn out and almost obnoxious way of doing it. But I can almost guarantee that if we teach them how to do these things really specific first, we eliminate a lot of the problems later, right? So we're going to focus on solutions to alter behavior instead of punishment, right? Lots of problem solving, teaching solutions. Okay, I'm noticing that you're late for school every week, every day this week. What are some solutions? What do we do, right? How do we change this, right? Now, obviously, this is really understandable if after a year of this, now we're like beyond frustrated, right? So I would also encourage, like, we can't wait that long, right? And so if this is new to you, I'll give you some tips next session to do family meetings, and this really plays a part in that. You do like a problem solving um, time when you're in your family meeting, and that really helps altering behavior. I talked about this already, encouragement instead of praise. So encouragement is going to notice the effort and their improvement in said activity, not just the outcome, not just a success, right? And so this is a better way, it's a better way than I said it before. It's basically we're going to notice effort and improvement, not just them doing it perfectly or right the first time, right? So encouragement is building that long-term self-esteem, building that self-empowerment and self-determination because that's what we want as parents, right? That's that like normal kid who's out there doing his thing. They turn 18, they believe they have it in them to do those things and succeed, and they want to do them on their own. All right. So this is one of the articles I was telling you guys about, the science behind positive discipline. This is a great article. So you've got the PDF. Okay. So we're getting kind of down to the wire, down to time. What we're going to do in part two, like I said, we're going to understand more about belonging and belief, right? So remember I was talking about the belief behind behavior. I'll help you guys understand that a little better. We'll go more into detail. I'll also kind of show you guys how we view mistakes and how this promotes better parenting and better behavior. And then we'll learn lots of practical tools, kind and firm. I told you guys about family meetings. As much as I can fit in, I'm going to fit into part two, and that'll be, I believe it's the 25th. So I'll throw the date in here. Oop, Ani already put it in there. So it's the 25th. Claudio, thank you so much. I'm so excited that you guys are interested in it. By the way, that actually helps us. Ani has a like an evaluation form or feedback form, we'll call it. And so she'll throw that in the chat. Please don't hesitate. Tell us what you like about tonight's session, what you didn't like, what improvements can I make or can we make? I'm here for you guys, and this is like my passion. So I love helping parents. I need help myself, so we're all in this together. I do feel like a lot of these skills really, really help parents. And I'm glad you guys are all here. I'm glad you guys came and spent a little bit of time with me. I really value that, and I believe um, that that's like the effort. It shows, and you're all doing the right thing. By doing that. So, if anyone has any questions, we've got just a couple minutes before we end. I put on the last slide. This is how to contact Ani if you need to about any of the classes. She generously coordinates all of this through the district. My information is there. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or let us know.